So, it's nice to talk about curious leadership and the attributes of it, but the real power of adopting curiosity is obviously that ability to ignite that in your organization or in your own life. It doesn't have to be about a business or an organization. It can be about yourself, but how curiosity truly drives innovation, growth, and change. To me, if you're going to take things to the next level in any organization, you've got to find ways to tweak, to change, to look beyond what you're currently doing. There's all kinds of examples throughout history where things that we take for granted today were launched by someone who just thought something different, right? Like we thought we'd be riding around on horses forever till someone found a way to mass produce cars, right? There's all kinds of things. And when we look at society and how it's grown and how it's changed, there's so much that happens kind of on a just gradual basis, but every now and then there's these leaps, right? Looking at cell phones, looking at cars, looking at computers, looking at all these things that the internet that really allowed us to make these leaps in how we live our lives, how we run our companies, how we run our organizations. But when you bring curiosity in, what it really allows you to do is challenge the status quo, look beyond your current situations and limitations. And that's something I talk about a lot because I think, we as human beings, we are creatures of habit, we are creatures of comfort, we are creatures of fear. And these are all very, very natural elements. These aren't negative to have, but when it comes to innovation, growth, and change, they are 100% the enemy. And so we got to find some ways to break through those and get beyond that. And that to me is where curiosity comes into play. In talking about curiosity and curious leadership within organizations, I talk about 3 shifts, right? 3 shifts that someone has to have in order to really embrace curiosity in their leadership. The first example of the shift, or the first shift to have, is that movement from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. I have talked to all kinds of leaders, mom and pop shops, nonprofit organizations, organizational leaders, everything across the spectrum as far as industry goes. And I always hear things like, that's not the way we've done things, that's not the way we do things, or this is the way we've always done it, or we've been running this business the same way for the past 10 years and it's working just fine for us. And my response to them is always, at least in my head, is always for now, right? Like you've been able to sustain your current growth, your current level for now without a lot of innovation, growth, and change. But at a certain point, you have to break free from that, right? You have to challenge those status quos and look beyond the way things have been done. And there's a story I heard about Steve Jobs and how he challenged the status quo. And to be honest with you, I don't know if this is true, but it proves my point, so I like to bring it up. They're working on what would become the iPhone. And people kept bringing Steve Jobs prototypes of phones in the same style that we were used to at the time. The small handhelds with the keyboard at the bottom, to your BlackBerry with the keyboard on the bottom. And he dared to ask the question, why does it have to have a physical keyboard? That changed everything. That's what created the iPhone that we still know today, because he dared to challenge the status quo that a phone exists with a screen on top and a keyboard on the bottom. He just dared to challenge that. And that's, I'll admit I'm an Android guy, but that's what we have for the Pixel 2, right? Like all of these things, all the phones we have today exist because one man had the audacity to challenge how phones were built. Obviously the next step that I talk about in being a curious leader is the operational excellence. And I think the operational excellence, again, I'll define as, and it's often overlooked. And my background, although I've done the cross-departmental function stuff and I consult in that and work in that too, but one of my favorite things where I got my start in operations was those internal operation functions, the director of operations, VP of operations roles, then gradually on to COO roles. But just truly seeing how everything an organization does, from the way it invoices, the way it pays bills, the way you ask your employees to onboard for payroll, how they handle their expense reimbursements, everything an organization does and how efficient and effective it is truly makes a lasting impact on the organization. And one example I like to point out, it's a bad example, but Fisker, the car company, that kind of imploded very, very quickly. And one of the things that came out about Fisker, when I think they'd already kind of hit bankruptcy at this point, but just news article after news article was coming out about Fisker and its operations, its leadership, et cetera. And one thing really struck me. They were shipping cars to customers without taking payment. This isn't a pad of paper. This isn't even a laptop. It's not a cell phone. It's not a packet of pens. These are $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 vehicles that are being shipped to customers without first getting the payment, which shows a complete breakdown in their operations, right? These are the things that I focus on. Things should flow from the contract to accounting, to legal, to back, to the bank reconciliation. Everything should flow and have safeguards in there to where, if something is missed, someone makes a mistake, someone catches it somewhere along the line. But again, this wasn't like one car that got shipped without payment. This was happening on a routine basis. I forget the stat, but it was millions of dollars in receivables that they had for cars. And it just goes to show, even big companies make these mistakes of not focusing on the operations and how things are all glued together, how things synchronize with one another, and what that oversight is, what that flow is. And it's really, really important to make sure that you are focusing on, you're streamlining your operations and making sure you're getting those intended results as efficiently and effectively as possible. Obviously, that brings us to our third shift, which is the curious culture shift. And again, people who have been listening to me for a while know I love this saying, like, unless you're the lead singer of a one-man band or one-person band, you got to bring the team along with you, right? And so you can have the best ideas, you can have the best ways to execute things, the best vision for your company. But at a certain point in any organization, it's got to move beyond the CEO. They might stay the visionary, but you got to bring in different perspectives. You got to bring in different things and ways to do things. It really, talking again about the Google study and psychological safety, it's really about how we allow others to thrive and bring curiosity to the table. One great example of that, from recent years is Microsoft. The early 2000s or early 2010s, it kind of got stagnant, right? It was your mom and pop shop office and with Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and then the new CEO came in, Nadella, and completely changed the culture. It brought back innovation. It brought back curiosity. It was really allowed Microsoft to transition not just from this home computer, home software type role into this enterprise system with Office 365 and all the components with that. And it really, just by changing how they viewed the company, how they viewed the organization, and allowed collaboration to happen in more meaningful ways, the organization was really to take things to new heights, and it has much higher cap rate, more profit, share price, everything has gone up for Microsoft for the last 8 years. So, it's important, I'm wrapping up kind of this whole thing about the three shifts is, mindset is what's really going to kind of set the mood, right? It's going to set the vision for where the organization can go, challenge the status quo, let us think outside the box. The operational excellence is about the pieces, the functionality, the actions that we are taking to drive, to achieve that vision, to achieve that mindset. And then lastly is that culture. It's what's going to bring the team along with us. It's going to allow us to not just reach what's right in front of us, but continue to innovate, continue to grow, and continue to change. And that's what being a curious leader is all about.